Chloe Winters thought inheriting millions was a dream come true, until she found out the catch: 6 months trapped in a mansion with Jaxon Wolfe, the coldest, most infuriating millionaire she'd ever met. He thought she was a chaotic mess, and she thought he needed a personality transplant. But what happens when forced proximity, fiery arguments, and accidental touches ignite a spark neither of them saw coming? Could the man who embodies everything she despises actually be falling for her, revealing a pain that might just break her heart? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The solicitor's office smelled of old money and stale air, a scent that pricked Chloe Winters' nose and made her already frayed nerves even more brittle. She sat stiffly on an antique chair, trying not to fidget, as Mr. Hemlock, a man whose suit seemed as starched as his demeanor, droned on about her grandmother's last wishes. Chloe had loved her eccentric grandmother, Eleanor, dearly, a woman who had lived a life as colorful as Chloe's own vibrant wardrobe. But Eleanor had a flair for the dramatic, even in death. And so, Mr. Hemlock concluded, peering over his half-moon spectacles, as per the terms of the late Ms. Eleanor Beaumont's will, you, Ms. Winters, are bequeathed 50% of her entire estate. Chloe's breath hitched. 50%? Of Eleanor's fortune? Her mind reeled. She'd known her grandmother was comfortable, but a multi-million-dollar estate? This was beyond anything she could have imagined. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly masked by a polite cough. However, Mr. Hemlock continued, his voice unwavering, there is a stipulation. Given Ms. Beaumont's profound belief in the importance of human connection and mutual understanding, a condition has been placed on this inheritance. You, Ms. Winters, must reside in the Beaumont estate, a property of significant value and personal sentiment to Ms. Beaumont, for a continuous period of 6 months. And you must do so concurrently with the other co-heir, Mr. Jaxon Wolfe. The name hit Chloe like a sudden gust of icy wind. Jaxon Wolfe. She vaguely remembered him from family gatherings years ago, a distant, serious-faced cousin whom Eleanor occasionally mentioned. He was the prodigy, the tech entrepreneur who had built a colossal empire from scratch, a world away from Eleanor's whimsical, art-filled life. A deep, unsettling premonition settled in Chloe's stomach. As if on cue, the heavy oak door to the office swung open, and a figure strode in. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed custom-tailored to his lean, powerful frame. His dark hair was swept back from a sharp, intelligent face, and his eyes, a startling shade of glacial blue, surveyed the room with an almost clinical detachment. He exuded an aura of cool competence, an unyielding force of nature. It was Jaxon Wolfe. He nodded curtly to Mr. Hemlock, his gaze sweeping over Chloe without a hint of recognition, as if she were merely another piece of furniture. Chloe, despite her initial shock, felt an immediate surge of irritation. Even after all these years, he still possessed that aloof arrogance. "Mr. Wolfe," Mr. Hemlock greeted. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the terms." Jaxon gave a curt nod. "The terms are clear, Mr. Hemlock. I've reviewed the will. Half the estate, provided we both reside in the property for 6 months. A rather eccentric condition, even for Aunt Eleanor." His voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of any warmth. His eyes finally landed on Chloe, and a flicker of something, perhaps mild annoyance, crossed his features. "And you must be Ms. Winters. Chloe, I believe." His tone made her name sound like an unpleasant chore. Chloe bristled. "It is Ms. Winters to you, Mr. Wolfe. And yes, it appears my grandmother, bless her unconventional soul, has thrown us into quite a predicament." She made sure her voice, usually bright and expressive, carried a hint of sarcasm. Jackson's lips thinned into a barely perceptible line. "Indeed. A predicament that I find inefficient. My time is valuable, Ms. Winters. 6 months away from my work for an inheritance I hardly need is an imposition. Chloe scoffed. Oh, I'm sure your billions will miss you terribly. And my time, Mr. Wolfe, is equally valuable. I have a life, a career, friends, none of whom appreciate spontaneous, forced cohabitation with a man who clearly thinks he's above common courtesy. Jackson's blue eyes narrowed, a cold glint appearing in their depths. Common courtesy, Ms. Winters, is a luxury I reserve for those who demonstrate a modicum of refinement. Your rather boisterous entrance into this discussion hardly suggests you possess it. And your charming ability to judge a book by its cover, Mr. Wolfe, Chloe retorted, leaning forward slightly, suggests you need a serious lesson in manners, and maybe a dose of human emotion. Mr. Hemlock cleared his throat, his discomfort palpable. Perhaps we should focus on the logistical details, given the unique circumstances. Logistical details, Jaxon stated, cutting him off, his gaze still locked on Chloe, begin with understanding the terms. We are bound by this. Failure to comply means forfeiture of the inheritance. Neither of us wants that, I presume. Chloe swallowed her anger, forcing herself to be pragmatic. No, Mr. Wolfe, I don't want to forfeit. Not when my grandmother clearly intended this for me. And perhaps, just perhaps, she intended something else too, something more than just money. She met his gaze defiantly. Jaxon merely scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on her nerves. Eleanor always had a whimsical streak. This is simply her final eccentricity. I intend to endure it with minimal disruption. Minimal disruption, Chloe echoed, a cynical laugh escaping her lips. With you, Mr. Wolfe, that might be impossible. This is going to be a very long 6 months. The first sparks had well and truly flown. As Mr. Hemlock handed them the keys to the sprawling Beaumont estate, Chloe felt a mixture of overwhelming excitement about the inheritance and profound dread about the impending cohabitation. Jaxon Wolfe, with his sharp tongue and icy demeanor, was everything she wasn't. And as they walked out of the solicitor's office, the tension between them was already a palpable force, promising a tumultuous, unpredictable future within the walls of Eleanor's beloved mansion. The 6 months were about to begin, and Chloe knew, with a sinking feeling, that her life was about to be turned completely upside down. The drive to the Beaumont estate was a silent war of wills. Chloe sat rigidly in the passenger seat of Jackson's sleek, silent luxury car, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. He drove with an almost unnerving precision, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were a complex algorithm he was trying to solve. The cityscape gradually gave way to rolling hills and finally, a winding, tree-lined drive that led to the mansion. Eleanor's home was even grander than Chloe remembered, a majestic Victorian edifice with turrets and intricate gingerbread trim. Nestled amidst sprawling gardens, it exuded a quirky charm that perfectly reflected her grandmother's personality, a stark contrast to the sterile, modern aesthetic Chloe imagined Jaxon preferred. As Jaxon parked the car with a seamless glide, Chloe felt a fresh wave of trepidation mixed with defiance. 6 months, in this house, with him. The moment they stepped through the ornate front doors, the silence was broken by the sound of Jackson's voice, devoid of any pleasantries. My office will be setting up a temporary workspace in the library. I expect complete quiet during my working hours, and do not, under any circumstances, touch my equipment. He spoke as if delivering a decree, his tone clipped and authoritative. Chloe crossed her arms, her irritation flaring. And I expect you not to treat me like an errant employee, Mr. Wolfe. This is my home now, too. And I assure you, my definition of quiet involves a lot less brooding and a lot more actual living. Jackson's icy blue eyes swept over her, a flicker of disdain in their depths. Living, Ms. Winters, does not, in my experience, require excessive noise or a disregard for established routines. He gestured vaguely towards a grand staircase. I've selected the master suite at the far end of the west wing. It offers the most privacy and optimal internet connectivity. Chloe scoffed. Optimal internet connectivity? Charming. I'll take the room with the best view of the rose garden, thank you very much. And I'll unpack my own way. She grabbed her ridiculously oversized, brightly patterned suitcase, a stark contrast to Jackson's single, minimalist leather bag, and marched towards the staircase. The first few days were a comical, if infuriating, dance of passive aggression and outright clashes. Chloe, with her vibrant personality and penchant for impromptu sing-alongs, found Jackson's rigid routine utterly stifling. He would emerge from his sanctum, the library, now a fortress of monitors and blinking lights, at precisely the same time each morning, impeccably dressed, to consume a meticulously portioned breakfast in silence. Chloe, on the other hand, woke up when she felt like it, usually opting for a noisy smoothie blended in the kitchen, its whirring sound echoing through the stately bay halls. Ms. Winters. Jackson's voice would cut through the morning air, sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil. Must your culinary preparations involve such sonic disruption? Mr. Wolfe, Chloe would retort, spooning another dollop of yogurt into her blender. Must your existence be quite so humorless? Their disagreements escalated from trivial matters of noise and routine to more fundamental clashes of values. Jackson was a minimalist, his personal space devoid of anything unnecessary. He saw Eleanor's cherished collection of whimsical art, her vibrant tapestries, and her eclectic furniture as clutter, an affront to efficiency. Chloe, who cherished every quirky item as a memory of her grandmother, fiercely defended them. This, Jackson declared one afternoon, gesturing to a particularly ornate, hand-carved wooden birdcage filled with silk flowers, is entirely superfluous. And a dust magnet. That, Mr. Wolfe, Chloe snapped, placing a protective hand on the cage, is a piece of art that brought my grandmother immense joy, and it's staying exactly where it is. Not everything in life needs to be efficient. Efficiency, Ms. Winters, Jackson countered, his voice dangerously low, is what allows progress. What allows empires to be built? What allows billions to be earned? And so, Mr. Wolfe, Chloe shot back, her eyes flashing, is what allows a life to be lived. Something I suspect you know very little about. The argument ended in a tense silence, a palpable wall of animosity settling between them. Yet, despite the constant friction, Chloe found herself observing Jackson with a reluctant curiosity. He was always working, his focus absolute, his mind seemingly operating at a speed she could barely fathom. She'd occasionally catch glimpses of his intense video calls, snippets of conversation about complex algorithms and global markets. He was undeniably brilliant, a force in his own right, even if he was a completely unbearable human being. One evening, Chloe found herself drawn to the library, a rare moment when Jackson wasn't there. She saw a blueprint spread across his large desk, covered in intricate diagrams and complex equations. It looked like a revolutionary design for a new kind of daiquiri, holographic display, something far beyond anything she had seen. She leaned closer, her own curiosity piqued, admiring the sheer complexity of his work. Just then, the door creaked open, and Jackson entered. He stopped dead in his tracks, his glacial blue eyes narrowing dangerously as they swept from the blueprint to Chloe's face. "What?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Are you doing in here, Ms. Winters?" I believe I made my expectations regarding my workspace explicitly clear. Chloe straightened, a defiant tilt to her chin. "I was merely admiring your work, Mr. Wolfe." It's surprisingly impressive, even for someone as emotionally stunted as yourself. Jackson's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He walked towards her, his presence utterly dominant, an intimidating force. Chloe stood her ground, refusing to shrink under his gaze. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a strange, undeniable current passing between them. It was hostility, yes, but beneath it, a subtle shift was occurring. Their frequent clashes, their verbal sparring, were slowly but surely stripping away the polite veneer of distant acquaintances, revealing raw, unfiltered emotions. Forced proximity was a volatile chemical reaction, and the elements of Chloe and Jaxon were beginning to fuse, whether they liked it or not. The 6 months had barely begun, and already, their carefully constructed worlds were colliding in ways neither had anticipated. The incident in the library, the undeniable tension that had sparked between them, left Chloe feeling strangely unsettled. It was more than just anger. It was a jolt, a recognition of an undeniable force that pulled and pushed them simultaneously. Jackson's presence, previously just irritating, now had an almost magnetic quality, drawing her attention even when she actively tried to ignore him. The mansion, vast and echoing, seemed to shrink around them, forcing their paths to cross with infuriating regularity. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, unless one of them actively avoided the dining room, became uncomfortable. Silent meals punctuated by the clinking of cutlery, each sound amplified in the tense atmosphere. Chloe tried to fill the silence with her usual cheerful chatter, but Jackson's stoic presence acted like a vacuum, sucking the joy out of her words. Yet, despite the constant friction, a peculiar routine began to emerge. Chloe would leave her vibrant scarves draped over the backs of antique chairs, knowing Jaxon would meticulously fold them and place them on a nearby table, his unspoken disapproval evident in the precise creases. He would leave his discarded coffee cups on the side table in the living room, and Chloe, despite herself, would find herself clearing them away, a tiny, almost unconscious act of domesticity. Their arguments, too, began to evolve. They were no longer just petty squabbles about noise levels or decorative choices. They delved deeper, scratching at the surface of their core beliefs. One evening, Chloe found Jaxon attempting to install a sleek, modern, voice-activated lighting system in the grand ballroom, replacing Eleanor's beloved dim chandeliers. "What are you doing?" Chloe exclaimed, horrified, as she saw him fiddling with wires. "You can't touch those. They're originals." "Originals that are inefficient and provide inadequate illumination," Jaxon stated without looking up. "This new system is superior in every conceivable way. It's logical." "Logical?" Chloe retorted, throwing her hands up. "This house isn't about logic, Jaxon. It's about history, about beauty, about warmth. It's about life." He paused, finally looking at her, his blue eyes holding an unfamiliar glint. "And life, Chloe," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, "is often a series of inefficiencies we choose to tolerate. I prefer progress, clarity, and I prefer charm." She shot back, stepping closer, "Something you seem utterly devoid of." The insult, usually met with a cold retort, was met instead with a lingering stare. His gaze held hers for a beat too long, a strange intensity in their blue depths. It was a heated debate, yes, but it felt less like a battle and more like a desperate attempt to understand, to bridge an invisible chasm. One rainy afternoon, Chloe was attempting to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen, determined not to ask Jaxon for help. She fumbled with the wrench, getting water everywhere, her frustration growing. Suddenly, a pair of strong, elegant hands reached over hers, gently taking the wrench. "Jaxon." He didn't say a word, simply tightened the fitting with a few swift, practiced movements. The leak stopped. Chloe looked up, startled, their faces uncomfortably close. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. His eyes, usually so remote, held the flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Patience? Amusement? Concern? "You were going to strip the thread," he murmured, his voice low, his breath warm on her cheek. Chloe felt a blush creep up her neck. "Well, I was trying to be self-sufficient." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "There is efficiency in knowing when to ask for assistance, Miss Winters, or in this case, when to step aside." He pulled back, the moment dissolving as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Chloe feeling strangely breathless. These accidental touches, these fleeting moments of proximity, began to chip away at their hostility, revealing a reluctant awareness of each other as more than just irritating co-inheritors. Chloe found herself noticing the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he was deep in thought, the subtle curve of his lips when he was amused by something on his computer screen, the quiet intensity with which he approached every task, and she sensed, perhaps, that he was noticing her too, despite his aloof demeanor. One evening, a particularly violent thunderstorm raged outside, rattling the old mansion's windows. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the house into immediate darkness. Chloe, who had always hated thunderstorms, let out a small gasp. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, steady and strong. Jaxon. He stood in the doorway of the living room, his silhouette stark against the flickering lightning outside. "Are you all right, Ms. Winters?" His voice, though still formal, held an unusual note of concern. "Just not a fan of thunderstorms," Chloe admitted, her voice a little shaky. He didn't reply immediately. Then, surprisingly, he moved towards her, placing a sturdy battery-powered lamp on the coffee table, casting a soft, warm glow around them. He sat in the armchair opposite her, not saying a word, simply remaining present. The silence wasn't tense this time, but oddly comforting. "My parents," Jaxon said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, breaking the stillness of the room. "They used to argue terribly during storms. It was as loud." Chloe looked at him, surprised by the unexpected confession. It was the first personal detail he had ever shared, a tiny crack in his impenetrable facade. She saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a momentary glimpse of something raw and exposed. "I'm sorry," she said softly, genuinely. He simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the now cold fireplace. "It's in the past." But the way he said it, the slight catch in his voice, suggested it was anything but. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of quiet understanding settled between them. The hostility hadn't vanished completely, but it had been irrevocably altered. It was now laced with a reluctant curiosity, a hesitant empathy. Forced proximity was indeed a powerful catalyst, stripping away their defenses, revealing layers neither of them had expected. Chloe was beginning to see the pain behind Jaxon's cold exterior, and she realized, with a surprising pang in her chest, that her initial disdain was slowly, dangerously, giving way to something far more complex. The 6 months were just beginning, and the mansion, once a battleground, was slowly transforming into something else entirely. The shared silence during the thunderstorm had opened a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in Jaxon's formidable emotional armor. Chloe found herself replaying his quiet confession, the tremor in his voice when he spoke of his arguing parents. It was a fleeting glimpse into a past that clearly held pain, a stark contrast to the impenetrable facade he usually presented. This newfound, albeit small, understanding began to subtly shift her perception of him. He was no longer just the rude millionaire. He was a complex individual, shaped by experiences she was only just beginning to uncover. Their interactions, while still punctuated by sharp remarks and exasperated sighs, now carried an underlying current of awareness, a hesitant acknowledgement of the vulnerability they had glimpsed in each other. Chloe, still infuriated by his insufferable arrogance, found herself instinctively softening her tone during their arguments, offering a sarcastic barb instead of a cutting insult. Jaxon, in turn, occasionally responded with a dry, almost witty retort, rather than his usual cold dismissal. The vastness of the mansion, once a source of constant friction, now sometimes offered moments of unexpected connection. One morning, Chloe found Jaxon in the grand drawing room, painstakingly attempting to reassemble an antique grandfather clock that Eleanor had famously tried and failed to repair for years. He was uncharacteristically disheveled, a smudge of grease on his cheek, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Having trouble with that old relic?" Chloe teased, leaning against the doorframe, a faint smile on her lips. "Grandma always said it had a mind of its own." Jaxon grunted, not looking up. "It's a matter of precise calibration, and a missing component that appears to have vanished centuries ago." Chloe walked closer, her gaze falling on a small, intricate spring that had rolled under a nearby ornate table. "Is this it?" she asked, picking it up. Jackson's head snapped up, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He took the spring from her, his fingers brushing hers, sending a jolt through her arm. He studied it for a moment, then, with surprising dexterity, fitted it into the clock's mechanism. A soft whirring sound, then a satisfying tick-tock filled the room. The clock, silent for decades, was alive again. He looked at Chloe, a flicker of surprise and something else, something akin to grudging appreciation, in his eyes. "Efficient, Ms. Winters. Your powers of observation are unexpected." Chloe shrugged, a warmth spreading through her chest at his rare, almost compliment. "It's a gift, unlike some people's ability to be unnecessarily rude." He almost smiled then, a fleeting twitch of his lips that quickly vanished. Indeed. The incident with the clock, a small victory, became another building block in their evolving dynamic. They found themselves, on occasion, working in parallel, silently assisting each other. Jaxon, observing Chloe's struggles with a particularly stubborn garden hose, would discreetly leave a brand-new, tangle-free one on the porch. Chloe, noticing his endless coffee consumption, would leave a freshly brewed pot in the kitchen, along with a plate of homemade cookies. These small, unspoken gestures became their own peculiar form of communication, a tentative peace treaty in their ongoing war of wills. One evening, Chloe was curled up in the living room, attempting to decipher one of Eleanor's notoriously cryptic journals. It was filled with riddles and coded messages, hinting at hidden treasures or secret passages within the mansion. She groaned in frustration. Jaxon, entering the room with a stack of technical reports, paused. "Trouble, Ms. Winters?" His voice was tinged with an unusual note of curiosity. "Grandma's journals," Chloe sighed, holding one up. She swore there were secrets hidden in this house, but her clues are impossible. Where the lion's roar meets the silver moon's gleam. What even is that? Jaxon walked over, taking the journal from her hand. He frowned, his analytical mind already at work. He spent a few minutes flipping through the pages, his expression thoughtful. "This isn't random," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's a system, a cipher." Chloe watched him, fascinated. He seemed to transform, his usual aloofness replaced by an intense, almost boyish enthusiasm for the puzzle. He began to pace, muttering calculations under his breath, occasionally tapping a finger against his chin. "The lion's roar," he mused, "likely refers to the gargoyle on the west tower. The silver moon, the orientation of the constellation Lyra during a specific lunar phase." He stopped suddenly, his eyes lighting up. "It's an astronomical key, an alignment." He led Chloe to a rarely used observatory on the mansion's highest turret, a dusty room filled with old telescopes and celestial charts. He meticulously calibrated a large telescope, peering through the eyepiece, then made a series of rapid calculations. "Tonight," he announced, his voice filled with a quiet triumph. "The conditions are perfect. The silver moon will align precisely with the lion's roaring gargoyle. There's a hidden compartment in the wall, directly beneath the viewing lens, at the exact angle of the star Lyra." Chloe watched in awe as he pressed against a section of the wall, and with a soft click, a small panel slid open, revealing a velvet-lined compartment. Inside lay a single, exquisite silver locket, engraved with Eleanor's initials and a handwritten letter. "Oh my goodness," Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She picked up the locket, tears pricking at her eyes. "She wanted me to find it. She always loved riddles." Jaxon watched her, a softer expression on his face than Chloe had ever seen. He seemed almost content. "She had a remarkable mind, your grandmother." "She did," Chloe agreed, looking at him, a genuine smile replacing her usual argumentative scowl. "Thank you, Jaxon. You really are brilliant." He gave a small, awkward nod, a faint blush creeping up his neck. It was the closest he had come to accepting a compliment gracefully. The discovery of the locket, a shared moment of triumph, created an even deeper connection between them. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home with shared secrets, shared challenges, and slowly, tentatively, shared joys. The hostility hadn't vanished entirely, but it was being steadily eroded by these unexpected moments of collaboration, of shared discovery, of vulnerability. The heated debates now often ended with lingering stares, unspoken questions hanging in the air. The accidental touches, the brushing of hands, the proximity during their shared tasks were no longer jolting. They were becoming something else. Something warm and curiously welcome. Chloe was uncovering the layers of pain and brilliance behind Jaxon's cold exterior, and the 6 months were turning into a journey neither of them had ever anticipated. The discovery of the locket and the shared triumph of solving Eleanor's riddle cast a subtle, yet profound, shift over the atmosphere in the mansion. The air, once crackling with overt hostility, now carried a softer hum, an unspoken acknowledgement of the deepening connection between Chloe and Jaxon. Their arguments, while still frequent, lost their sharp, cutting edge, transforming into a peculiar form of banter, a verbal sparring match laced with reluctant respect and even, dare she admit it, a burgeoning affection. Chloe found herself observing Jaxon with a new lens. The cold, unfeeling millionaire was still very much present in his rigid routines and blunt pronouncements. But beneath that formidable exterior, she now saw glimpses of the intense, almost childlike focus he applied to problems, the unexpected kindness in his actions, and the profound, almost aching, vulnerability she had witnessed during the thunderstorm. He wasn't just brilliant, he was complex, and, to her surprise, increasingly captivating. Jaxon, in turn, seemed to be slowly, imperceptibly, adapting to Chloe's vibrant presence. He no longer scowled quite as fiercely at her impromptu singing sessions, sometimes even pausing his work in the library to listen, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. He still corrected her grammar or her slightly chaotic organization, but his tone held less disdain and more a quiet exasperation that almost sounded fond. One afternoon, Chloe was struggling to reach a high shelf in the grand library, attempting to retrieve a dusty tome for her research into Eleanor's vast collection. She stretched, wobbled precariously on a rickety stool, and was about to tumble when a strong hand gripped her waist, steadying her. "Careful, Ms. Winters," Jaxon's voice rumbled close to her ear, his breath warm on her neck. "Such recklessness is inefficient and potentially hazardous to your person." Chloe froze, acutely aware of the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of his body behind her. She could feel the subtle vibration of his voice against her back. "Well, if you weren't so tall and I wasn't so vertically challenged," she quipped, her voice a little breathless. I wouldn't need to engage in such recklessness. He chuckled, a low, unexpected sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Perhaps, or perhaps a more logical approach would involve using the proper ladder. He then effortlessly reached up and retrieved the book she needed, placing it in her hands. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting spark. Chloe turned to face him, her heart thumping a little faster. His blue eyes, usually so guarded, held a softened gaze, a warmth she hadn't seen before. They lingered for a beat too long, an unspoken question hanging in the air. The unspoken tension between them was becoming undeniable, a magnetic pull that threatened to shatter the fragile truce they had established. Forced proximity was truly working its magic, forcing them to see beyond their preconceived notions. They began to share stories, hesitant at first, then with increasing ease. Chloe spoke of her grandmother's unconventional upbringing, her own bohemian lifestyle as an artist and freelance writer, her dreams and her struggles. Jaxon, surprisingly, opened up about his early life, the immense pressure of building his tech empire from nothing, the constant demands of his work, and the loneliness that often accompanied his success. One evening, after a particularly long day of deciphering Eleanor's cryptic architectural notes, they found themselves sharing a late dinner. The conversation flowed easily, no longer marked by their usual verbal jousting. "My parents," Jaxon said quietly, stirring his tea, "they died when I was young, an accident. I was very alone. I channeled everything into my work, building, creating, controlling. It felt like the only way to make sense of things." His voice was low, tinged with a raw vulnerability Chloe hadn't heard before. Chloe's heart ached for him. She pictured him, a young boy, suddenly orphaned, burying his grief in ambition. It explained so much: his emotional distance, his need for control, his seemingly cold exterior. "I'm so sorry, Jaxon," she said, her voice soft, reaching across the table to gently touch his hand. "That's a lot to carry." He flinched at her touch, a momentary recoiling, but then he relaxed, his hand turning over to briefly clasp hers. "It was," he acknowledged, his gaze meeting hers, a rare, unguarded look in his eyes. Eleanor, she was the only one who seemed to understand. She saw beyond the ambition, the drive. She saw the boy who just wanted a family. Chloe squeezed his hand gently. "She loved you, Jaxon, fiercely." He nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, a genuine warmth radiating from him for the first time. The conversation continued late into the night, spanning topics from their childhood memories to their hopes for the future, a rare intimacy blossoming between them. The walls Jaxon had so meticulously built around himself seemed to be crumbling, brick by painful brick, revealing the complex, wounded man beneath. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was noticeably different. The unspoken connection, the shared vulnerability of the previous night, hung in the air like a delicate perfume. Jaxon, though still reserved, carried himself with a subtle lightness. He even initiated conversation over breakfast, asking Chloe about her plans for the day, a small gesture that spoke volumes. As the weeks continued to melt into months, their interactions evolved further. Their arguments were now almost playful, teasing rather than hostile. Lingering stares became more frequent, holding a deeper meaning than before. Accidental touches lingered, a subtle caress, a hesitant brush of fingers, sending silent currents of electricity through them. Chloe found herself anticipating his presence, a strange longing settling in her chest when he was away, buried in his work. She found herself smiling more, laughing more freely, and feeling a sense of belonging in the grand, eccentric mansion that now felt truly like home. Jaxon, surprisingly, started seeking out her company. He'd bring his work to the living room, ostensibly to discuss a complex problem, but often ending up in conversation about anything and everything. He even began to show a genuine interest in Eleanor's whimsical art collection, asking Chloe about the stories behind each piece, his analytical mind captivated by the narratives they held. One evening, as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, Jaxon turned to her, his blue eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, a tremor of vulnerability in his tone. I realize I haven't been particularly gracious or kind. When we first met, I saw you as an inconvenience, unrefined, loud." He paused, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "I was wrong. You are vibrant and incredibly perceptive, and you've brought a warmth back to this house that I didn't realize it had lost." Chloe's heart fluttered. His confession, raw and honest, took her breath away. "And you, Jaxon," she replied, her voice soft. "I thought you were just a rude, humorless workaholic. But you're brilliant and kind, and you have a good heart, even if you try to hide it behind a fortress of logic." Their gazes met, holding a profound, unspoken understanding. The air crackled with a different kind of electricity now, not of hostility, but of something far more potent, far more dangerous. The 6 months were rapidly drawing to a close, and Chloe knew, with a dizzying certainty, that the rude millionaire was falling for her. And, terrifyingly, she was falling for him too. The mansion, once a battleground, had become a crucible for a connection neither of them had ever expected. The confession on the veranda hung in the air between them, a fragile, unspoken promise that shattered the last remnants of their initial hostility. Chloe's heart thrummed with a dizzying mix of elation and trepidation. Jackson's words, a raw admission of his softened perception of her, were a balm to her soul, affirming the subtle shifts she had felt but hadn't dared to acknowledge fully. The cold, unapproachable facade had finally cracked, revealing the man beneath, and he was far more complex and far more appealing than she had ever imagined. Their interactions transformed. The teasing banter remained, but it was now infused with a tender undertone, a playful intimacy that hinted at deeper feelings. Lingering stares became prolonged gazes, filled with unspoken questions and shared understanding. Accidental touches became less accidental, their hands brushing, fingers intertwining for a brief, electric moment before pulling away, leaving behind a trail of warmth and anticipation. Chloe found herself seeking out Jackson's company with an undeniable eagerness. She'd bring her art supplies to the library, sketching quietly while he worked, the rhythmic click of his keyboard a strangely comforting sound. He, in turn, would often join her in the sprawling gardens, ostensibly to make a phone call, but often ending up in conversation, his usual rigid posture relaxing as they talked. He even started asking her about her artistic process, his analytical mind intrigued by her intuitive creativity. One afternoon, Chloe was painting in the sunroom, trying to capture the vibrant hues of Eleanor's rose garden. Jaxon entered, carrying 2 cups of tea, an uncharacteristic gesture. He placed one beside her, the steam curling invitingly. "You have a remarkable talent, Chloe," he said, his voice soft, studying her canvas. He rarely used her first name, and the sound of it, laced with such genuine admiration, sent a shiver down her spine. To capture such ephemeral beauty, Chloe looked up, a blush creeping up her neck. "Thank you, Jaxon. It's a way for me to process the world, to find beauty in chaos." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "Chaos can indeed be beautiful. I'm beginning to understand that." His blue eyes held hers, a silent intensity passing between them. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, the weight of their growing feelings pressing in. The forced proximity, once a source of endless irritation, had truly become a catalyst for reluctant confessions. Jaxon began to share more about his childhood, the profound loneliness after his parents' death, the immense pressure he felt to succeed, to prove himself, to build an empire that would protect him from ever feeling vulnerable again. He spoke of the isolation of his success, the difficulty of truly trusting anyone, and the constant fear of being exploited. "I built walls, Chloe," he confessed one evening, his voice low as they sat by the flickering fireplace. "High, impenetrable walls, to keep myself safe, to keep from feeling that kind of pain again." He gestured vaguely to the grand, yet cold, marble fireplace. "This house, when I first came here after Eleanor's passing, it felt like another empty shell, another monument to absence." Chloe listened, her heart aching for the young, wounded boy he had been. "And now?" she asked softly, gently touching his arm. He turned to her, his blue eyes holding a vulnerability that almost broke her heart. Now it feels like home, because you're here. You filled it with life, with color, with noise." A faint smile touched his lips. "Even the noise isn't so bad anymore." He reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw, his touch sending an electric current through her. His thumb brushed her cheek, and his gaze dropped to her lips. The unspoken desire was palpable, a silent question hanging in the air between them. Chloe's breath hitched, her heart hammering against her ribs. The confessions, hesitant at first, became more open, more profound. Jaxon revealed his insecurities, his moments of self-doubt, the quiet longing for connection he had suppressed for so long. Chloe shared her own fears, the pressure of living up to Eleanor's legacy, the anxiety of stepping outside her comfort zone, and her hidden desire for stability amidst her free-spirited nature. They were peeling back layers, revealing the authentic selves beneath the facades they presented to the world. The 6-month deadline, once a distant point of liberation, now loomed like a ticking clock, a source of growing anxiety. The thought of the cohabitation ending, of returning to their separate lives, filled Chloe with a profound sense of loss. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she didn't want to leave him. And the subtle changes in Jaxon's demeanor, the deepening warmth in his gaze, the increasing frequency of his touches, told her he felt the same. One particularly stormy night, reminiscent of their first shared moment of vulnerability, the power flickered and died. The mansion was plunged into darkness, but this time there was no fear, only a comfortable familiarity. Jaxon instinctively reached for Chloe's hand in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers, a firm, comforting clasp. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, a raw intensity in his tone. I don't want this to end." Chloe squeezed his hand, her own emotions mirroring his. "Me neither, Jaxon. Me neither." The words hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the burgeoning love between them. The initial hostility, the sharp tongues, the clashes of personality, had all been the crucible in which something profound and unexpected had been forged. Chloe had started to uncover the pain behind Jaxon's cold exterior, yes, but in doing so, she had also uncovered a depth of feeling in herself that she hadn't known existed. The rude millionaire was indeed falling for her, and she for him, and the mansion, once a temporary cage, had become a haven where their hearts had finally found their unlikely home. But with the 6-month deadline rapidly approaching, the question remained, what would happen when the forced proximity finally ended? The confession of feelings, whispered in the darkness of the power outage, transformed the remaining weeks of their cohabitation into a period of exquisite, almost unbearable tenderness. The mansion, which had witnessed their fiery clashes, now became the silent keeper of their burgeoning romance. Every shared meal, every accidental touch, every lingering glance was imbued with a new, profound meaning. The air between them crackled, not with hostility, but with unspoken desires and the palpable weight of their growing affection. Jaxon, stripped of his emotional armor, revealed a depth of warmth and affection that astonished Chloe. He still retained his logical, precise nature, but it was now tempered with a surprising gentleness. He'd leave small, thoughtful gifts for her. A rare edition of a book she'd mentioned, a freshly brewed cup of her favorite herbal tea placed silently on her desk. He started asking her opinion on aspects of his work, truly listening to her intuitive insights, a sign of profound respect. His blue eyes, once glacial, now held a constant, soft warmth when they rested on her. Chloe, for her part, found herself completely captivated by this new, unveiled Jaxon. She saw the quiet strength beneath his vulnerability, the fierce loyalty that manifested in his protective gestures. Her vibrant personality, once a source of contention, was now celebrated by him. She found joy in making him laugh, in coaxing a rare, genuine smile from his lips, in breaking through the walls he had meticulously built around himself. Their conversations deepened further, moving beyond confessions of pain to shared dreams and aspirations. They talked for hours about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears, and their triumphs. Chloe spoke of her desire to open an art studio, a place where creativity could flourish without judgment. Jaxon, surprisingly, revealed a hidden passion for philanthropic endeavors, particularly in using technology to bridge educational gaps in underserved communities, a stark contrast to his public image as a ruthless entrepreneur. One evening, as they strolled through the moonlit rose garden, the scent of blooming flowers perfuming the air, Jaxon stopped, turning to face her. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs caressing her cheeks. "Chloe," he began, his voice low, a tremor of emotion underlying his words. "I never thought I would feel this way again. After everything, you've brought light back into my life, back into this house. I don't want to lose that." Chloe's heart swelled with emotion. "You won't, Jaxon," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You won't." He leaned in, and their lips met, tentatively at first, then with a deepening passion that spoke volumes of their shared longing. It was a kiss that melted away all past hostilities, all lingering doubts, a silent promise of a future they both desperately craved. The rose garden, witness to Eleanor's eccentricities, now bore witness to the blossoming of a love neither of them had expected. The reality of the 6-month deadline, however, loomed larger with each passing day. With only a few weeks left, a quiet anxiety began to creep into their idyllic bubble. They both knew the terms of the will were absolute. After 6 months, the inheritance would be split, and their forced cohabitation would end. The thought of returning to their separate lives, of the mansion falling silent once more, was a painful prospect. "What happens, Jaxon?" Chloe asked one morning, her voice small, as they sat lingering over breakfast. "When the 6 months are up, the will it's clear, we go our separate ways." Jackson's jaw tightened, a familiar flicker of resolve returning to his eyes, but this time it was laced with concern, not coldness. "We won't," he stated, his voice firm. "We'll find a way. Eleanor's will specified cohabitation, not separation afterward. It was a test, Chloe, and I believe we've passed." He spent the next few days in intense, focused thought, retreating to his library, but this time, Chloe sensed it wasn't out of coldness, but out of a desperate need to find a solution. He emerged with a proposition, a meticulously crafted plan, as intricate and brilliant as his tech designs. "Eleanor was a master of loopholes, Chloe," he explained, holding a copy of the will. "The will states we must reside in the mansion for 6 continuous months. It does not state we must leave it afterwards. It also stipulates that the inheritance is contingent on U.S. demonstrating mutual understanding and genuine connection. If we can prove that, definitively, the spirit of the will is fulfilled." His plan was audacious and utterly Jaxon. He proposed establishing a foundation, named in Eleanor's honor, dedicated to promoting art and technology, a perfect blend of their passions. The foundation would be headquartered in the mansion, requiring both of their continued presence for its operation. This would fulfill the spirit of the will's cohabitation clause, transforming their forced living arrangement into a shared, purposeful endeavor. They would continue to reside there, not as a condition, but as a choice, united by a common goal. Chloe's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Jaxon, that's brilliant. It's exactly something Grandma would have approved of, using her legacy to create something new, something that brings people together." They immediately set about putting the plan into motion. Jaxon, leveraging his formidable business acumen and network, began the legal and financial groundwork for the foundation. Chloe, channeling her artistic vision and her grandmother's whimsical spirit, started envisioning the mansion as a vibrant hub for artists, innovators, and thinkers. They worked tirelessly, their combined energies a formidable force. As the final day of the 6-month cohabitation period approached, there was a sense of nervous excitement, not dread. They knew their future was no longer dictated by a will, but by their own choices, their shared purpose, and their undeniable love. On the morning of the official end of the cohabitation clause, Mr. Hemlock arrived at the mansion, looking as starched and proper as ever. He found Chloe and Jaxon sitting together in the grand living room, holding hands, a palpable sense of warmth and unity emanating from them. "Ms. Winters, Mr. Wolfe," Mr. Hemlock began, clearing his throat, "the 6-month period has officially concluded. As per the will, the estate is now formally divided and the cohabitation clause is fulfilled." He held out the official documents for their signatures. Jaxon, however, gently pushed the papers aside. "Mr. Hemlock," he stated, his voice firm, "we have established the Eleanor Beaumont Foundation for the Arts and Technology. Its headquarters will be here, at the mansion. Both Chloe and I will serve as co-directors, and as such, we will continue to reside on the premises, dedicating ourselves to its mission." Chloe squeezed his hand, a radiant smile on her face. "My grandmother's true wish, Mr. Hemlock, was for connection and understanding. We believe we have honored that wish, and we intend to continue honoring it together." Mr. Hemlock blinked, utterly flummoxed by this unexpected turn of events. He looked from Jaxon's resolute expression to Chloe's beaming face, a slow, bewildered smile finally touching his lips. "Well," he stammered, "I must say, Ms. Beaumont certainly would have appreciated the ingenuity and the spirit of it all." He completed the necessary paperwork, acknowledging their decision. As he departed, the mansion felt lighter, filled not just with the promise of shared inheritance, but with the boundless potential of a shared life. Chloe looked at Jaxon, her heart overflowing. "We did it," she whispered, her eyes shining. "We found our loophole." He pulled her closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "More than that, Chloe. We found each other." The mansion, once a gilded cage of forced proximity, had become the foundation of their future. Chloe Winters, who had been forced to live with a rude millionaire for 6 months, had not only tamed his sharp tongue and uncovered the pain behind his cold exterior, but had found herself completely, irrevocably, falling for him. And he, in turn, had fallen for her. Their story, born of an eccentric will and initial hostility, had blossomed into a love that defied expectations, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in what you inherit, but in the unexpected connections that make a house a home and two very different people a bray. Family.